A job, a cowboy, and a proposal. The morning sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of amber and gold. Sarah Mitchell stood on the wooden porch of the Double Bar Ranch, her blonde hair catching the light as she watched the horizon. The air was still cool from the night, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant promise of another scorching day. She had been working at the ranch for 3 months now, taking photographs for a travel magazine back east. What was supposed to be a 2-week assignment had stretched into something much longer. The editor kept asking for more shots, more stories, more of the authentic Western experience that Sarah seemed to capture so perfectly. But Sarah knew the real reason she stayed wasn't the job. Morning, city girl. The deep voice made her turn. Jake Morrison emerged from the barn, his worn boots crunching softly on the gravel. His dark hair was still damp from washing, and he wore that familiar black hat that seemed as much a part of him as his quiet smile. Even after all these weeks, her heart still skipped when she saw him. "Morning, cowboy," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Early start today." Jake nodded, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. "Cattle don't wait for anyone." "You heading out with that camera of yours again?" Sarah lifted her camera bag. "The magazine wants shots of the sunrise over Devil's Canyon. Apparently, my editor thinks it'll make good cover material." "Devil's Canyon's a fair ride," Jake said, his brow creasing slightly. "Rocky terrain. You sure you want to go alone?" "I've been managing fine on my own," Sarah said, though the offer in his voice made her pulse quicken. She had learned to be independent, to rely on herself. It was safer that way. Jake studied her face for a moment, those deep brown eyes of his seeming to see right through her carefully constructed walls. "I reckon you have, but I was heading that direction anyway. Might as well ride together." Sarah hesitated. These morning rides with Jake had become both the best and most dangerous part of her days. Best because she felt more alive in his presence than she had in years. Dangerous because she was starting to care too much about a man whose life was rooted in this desert, while hers waited for her back in New York. "All right," she said finally. "But I work at my own pace." Jake's smile was gentle. "Wouldn't expect anything else from you, Sarah." They saddled their horses in comfortable silence. Sarah had grown fond of Buttercup, the gentle mare the ranch owner had assigned to her. The horse seemed to understand her moods, standing patiently. While Sarah secured her camera equipment, the ride to Devil's Canyon took them through some of the most beautiful country Sarah had ever seen. Rolling hills dotted with cacti gave way to red rock formations that caught the morning light like ancient cathedrals. Jake rode easily beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the land his family had worked for. 3 generations. "My grandfather used to say this desert talks to you if you know how to listen," Jake said as they paused to let the horses drink from a small creek. "Said it would tell you everything you needed to know about life." "And what has it told you?" Sarah asked, dismounting to check her camera settings. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "That some things are worth staying for, and some are worth leaving for." Sarah's hands stilled on her camera. There was something in his tone, a weight to his words that made her look up at him, but Jake was already remounting, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. They reached Devil's Canyon as the sun climbed higher, casting dramatic shadows across the rocky walls. Sarah lost herself in her work, capturing the play of light and shadow, the way the ancient stones seemed to glow from within. Jake waited patiently, sometimes holding her reflector or simply sitting quietly on his horse, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You have a gift," he said when she finally lowered her camera. "The way you see things. It's like you find the soul of a place." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's just my job." "No," Jake said, dismounting and walking toward her. "It's more than that. You see beauty where others might see just rock and dust. That's a rare thing." They were standing close now, close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. The desert was silent around them except for the whisper of wind through the canyon walls. "Jake," she began, but he gently touched her hand, stopping her words. "I know you have a life back east," he said quietly. "I know this was supposed to be temporary, but Sarah, these past months, having you here, it's changed something in me." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had dreaded this moment and longed for it in equal measure. "Jake, let me finish," he said, his thumb tracing over her knuckles. "I know I don't have much to offer. Just a ranch that's been in my family for generations, a simple life, under these big skies. But I can't let you go without telling you how I feel." The words she had been holding back for weeks threatened to spill out. How she had fallen in love with this quiet, steady man who treated horses like partners and talked about the land like it was alive. How she had started to imagine a different life, one where she could wake up to these sunrises every day. But reality crashed over her like a cold wave. Her apartment in New York, her career, her carefully planned future, everything she had worked so hard to build. "I can't," she whispered, pulling her hand free. "My life is in New York, my job, my apartment, everything I've worked for." Jake nodded, slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "I understand. I just ... I had to try." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, filled with the weight of unspoken word. Sarah's camera bag felt heavier than usual, loaded down with pictures of a place she was falling in love with, taken by hands that were trembling with the effort of holding back tears. That evening, Sarah sat on her bed in the guest cabin, staring at the images on her laptop screen. The photographs from Devil's Canyon were some of the best work she had ever done. The magazine would love them. Her editor would probably offer her another assignment, maybe even a promotion. But all she could think about was the look in Jake's eyes when she had pulled away from him. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Patterson, the ranch owner's wife, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Mind if I sit a spell?" Sarah stepped aside, grateful for the company. Mrs. Patterson settled into the small chair by the window, her weathered hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. "You know," Mrs. Patterson began, "I came out here from Chicago 35 years ago. Thought I was crazy, leaving behind everything I knew for a cowboy I'd met at a rodeo." Sarah looked up, surprised. She had never heard this story. "I was scared," Mrs. Patterson continued, "scared of giving up my independence, my career, my whole identity for a man. But you know what I learned? Love doesn't ask you to give up who you are. It asks you to become who you're meant to be." "But what if I'm making a mistake?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at her. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Honey, the only mistake is not listening to your heart. That boy loves you something fierce, and unless my eyes are failing me, you feel the same way about him." After Mrs. Patterson left, Sarah sat in the darkness of her cabin, listening to the desert night. Coyotes called in the distance, and she could hear the gentle nickering of horses in the corral. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she was home. The next morning, Sarah found Jake in the barn, grooming his horse with the methodical care that characterized everything he did. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the careful way he guarded his expression. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. Jake's hands stilled on the brush. "Sarah, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," she said, moving closer. "I need to tell you that you're wrong about not having much to offer. You have integrity, kindness, and a way of seeing the world that makes me want to be a better person. You have roots in a place that speaks to something deep inside me." Jake set down the brush, giving her his full attention. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "I've spent so long building a life I thought I wanted that I'm terrified to want something different. But Jake, when I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Jake's expression softened, hope flickering in his eyes. "I don't know how to make this work," Sarah continued. "My editor wants me back in New York, and I have obligations there. But maybe ... maybe we could figure it out together." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Then he reached up and removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "are you saying you might consider staying?" "I'm saying I love you," she said, the words finally free. "And I think love is worth taking risks for." Jake's smile was brighter than the desert sunrise as he pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared tasted of coffee and possibility, of new beginnings and old dreams finally finding their voice. When they finally broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "We'll figure it out," he murmured, "whatever it takes." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not the carefully planned one she had mapped out in New York, but something richer and more real. A life built on love and trust, under the endless Arizona sky. "I have one condition," she said, unable to suppress her smile. "Anything," Jake replied. "I get to keep taking pictures. The desert has stories to tell, and I want to be the one to tell them." Jake's laugh was warm and full of joy. "I wouldn't have it any other way, city girl." As they stood there in the morning light, surrounded by the scent of hay and leather and the promise of forever, Sarah knew she had found something more valuable than any job or apartment could ever be. She had found home in the arms of a cowboy, and love in the heart of the desert that had taught them both how to listen. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but bright with possibility, and for the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was ready to embrace it, one sunrise at a time.